Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote podcast. We are back in our man caves and are no longer sitting face to face in Washington, D.C. Mike, how was your travels? You back in Sacramento?
I'm back in Sac, but I got to tell you, man, I thought it was going to be a little bit easier this cycle. First time in 3 decades, 30 years. I am not on the campaign trail with a big campaign. And brother, this book tour it's taking the wind out of my sails. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. You look great.
Everywhere.
Yeah, that's more than I'm used to. You look like you're holding up really well, man.
It's all smoke and mirrors. I did MSNBC last night on the Stephanie Rule at 11:45. Everybody knows that I should have been in bed for 3 hours. So yesterday I took a 2-hour nap prepping for the Stephanie Rule. And so I was up later than usual, but Ebony Payne can explain this to y'all, but I am very schedule driven. I schedule everything. And if I know about something, I'll schedule around it because that's the only way you young campaigners will ever survive. If you watch Mike Madrid's old ass and how he's doing all these book tours, he's everywhere as well. But guess what? I bet he's working off a schedule. I know he's got to be somewhere in Pasadena tomorrow and LA the next day. Like, am I right, Mike?
Yeah, no, that's the only way you can get it done. And I'm not good at handling my own schedule. They don't allow me to handle my own schedule anymore because I'll mess it up. So I just got
no doubt. We can ask Andres about that. But anyway, Andres helps us as behind the scenes putting this together. Look, I wanted to make sure before we talk about the news of the day that me and Mike, I'll go first and then Mike can give you his impression, is I really want to just give a heartfelt thanks to everybody who came out to the live show last week. If you haven't watched it, you should watch the YouTube of that. Also want to thank Politicology, if I don't mess that up, and Ron Steslow. He had a professional crew of folks there with microphones and lights and big cameras, and it really made me and Mike Madrid look good, which is hard to do. But again, Mike can talk about the eclectic group of Republicans and progressive Democrats that were in the room, but I want to just thank them, Mike.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. Like I said, it was like two of my worlds colliding there. Ron is a dear, dear friend. He's a friend of the show. He's been so supportive of the Latino Vote podcast. Politicology has been blowing up and going like gangbusters. And to kind of sit down and talk with Ron, that I talk about, deeper, bigger intellectual pursuits with, and then Chuck, who I just sit here and learn campaign stuff from. It was nice to have you guys both in the same room, and I appreciate you. And it was really a eclectic, there's a word for the day, audience where we had this kind of never Trump Republicans and Latino political activists in the same room. That's the coalition that's going to get Harris elected, by the way. That was it.
It is. I never thought about that, but you're damn right.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. And people were, having drinks and enjoying each other and having a conversation, getting a lot of laughs at our expense, which is what it's all about. And I want to thank you and your team for pulling it all together. It was a lot of work in the middle of an election cycle. Thank you to Solidarity Strategies. Thank you to Chuck Rocha. Thanks, Ron Steslow. You guys are my dear friends, and that's why I love you. So thanks.
I appreciate it. It was good, and everybody had a good time. I'm still going to send you an invoice for half of those tacos, just so you know. Half the tacos. My God, I did too. So back on the news of the day, we're recording this on Wednesday. Most of the time, Andres gets this out by Friday. Sometimes it's a little earlier, sometimes it's a little later. But right now, we have Hurricane Milton bearing down on what we call the Treasure Coast on the west side of Florida. For all of our listeners down there, we want to keep you in our thoughts and prayers. Make sure you listen to evacuations. Make sure if the governor and anybody else down there, your local officials that said, get out. These hurricanes are going to drive me to drinking more. And this is the second one hitting the same area within the last 2 weeks. And y'all know that my mama, my sister, my nieces, they all live right there in Cape Coral and Fort Myers. My good friend, John Soates of Vote Vets, lives up in Sarasota. And I've got a lot of friends down there. And I was telling Mike before we went on air that I finally got my niece, who is 9 months pregnant. She's due to have a baby in 10 days. Her 1-year-old and my 73-year-old mother finally talked these rednecks to get the hell out of there yesterday. We got them an Airbnb in Miami and sent them south because I thought if they went north, they'd be in traffic for 2 days. And a pregnant woman, a 73-year-old redneck from East Texas, is not good stuck in a car that long, but they're out of there before any of you start sending me stuff because I wanted you to know that they're safe. Now, my crazy sister's going to ride it out with her husband, but they are what we call saltwater rednecks to the core. poor. They've got a boat. They've got a boat that they love more than their house, and they're going to be fine. They got generators. They got all the stuff. But everybody else who's listening, just make sure that you take care of what you take care of. Because you know what? And I want to talk about the politics of this in a minute. But Mike, you got anything to say about the hurricanes?
No, just get out. As Chuck said, just do it. Just leave for a few days. There's no reason not to. There are going to be deaths. This is going to be extraordinary, and we are in a new era. We are in a new age, and these are not the storms that you can just kind of ride out the way that you used to. They're thinking about redefining new storms to Cat sixes.
Wow.
This is unprecedented territory. So we got to start listening to the experts. We got to listen to people. It's not worth it. Everything else can be replaced, not your life. Take care of yourself out there.
I told Mike a while ago that right before my mama left, she was over at my sister's house. They were batting everything down. And my brother-in-law, who's got this beautiful boat that they take out every weekend, him and my sister go snook fishing every weekend. And he got a guy come over to where he could lift it 6 foot out of the water. You could just could just lift it 4 foot. So he could take a 6 foot surge before the boat lift is then inundated with water and the boat would get destroyed. And him and my mom are outside and they're talking about this and all the money he's spending trying to preserve this boat. And my mama just wheels around in her redneck accent and says, Cliff, you may just have to give that boat to Jesus tomorrow. So she is more or less saying your life is more important than that damn boat. Sometimes you just got to give God whatever he wants when he comes with the national disasters. Now, much like my mother, who thinks only God is in control of all the hurricanes, here's the political implications of a hurricane. I'm going to give you two facts that I think they are, that I'm going to hear what Mike Madrid is going to spin this into whatever he thinks the impact is and could disagree with me. But the first thing is that these storms undoubtedly are getting bigger. You just heard Mike Madrid say that they're trying to maybe go to a category 6 because they're bigger than ever. They're happening more frequently. They're forming quicker and moving quicker. This thing developed in the Gulf of Mexico and came from the Gulf of Mexico to Florida and formed in like 2 days. I was just waiting for Donald Trump to go on the air and be like, they're not only sending their worst and their rapists, now they're sending us hurricanes from Mexico. That hasn't happened yet, but I would not be surprised when it does. But not making light of that, climate change is real. The oceans are warmer than they were. The planet is warmer than they were. You can see it when you're fishing down in the Everglades, like the water rises more than it used to. Miami's going underwater. And I think it's a unique time for Democrats to have conversations with Republicans about, is climate change real? Is it not? Do you even believe in climate change? And then the second piece of that, because there's a real difference in the way that the presidential campaigns look at climate. Because there's Project 2025 that wants to literally privatize parts of the EPA and the Hurricane Tracking Center. And the one thing I don't want to do is give the contract for hurricane tracking to the lowest bidder on a government contract. All that sounds horrible to me. And then the second piece of this are all these Republicans in Florida who have voted against FEMA relief or funding FEMA. This is how you're going to see politics start playing into hurricane. One is climate change. Climate change is real. How are you going to debate that fact? I think young voters in particular care about that right now, especially if people are having to do what I'm doing, is having to move my mama across the state from being 1,000 miles away to make sure she don't get killed. That's real. And then also the funding piece of this. You know, all these crazy Republicans doing it. So funding on one side and climate on the other is the two ways. And then the third thing, and I promise I'll shut up, Mike, but the third piece of this is this hurricane's going to run right through the I-4 corridor. That's little Puerto Rico. So there's a ton of Puerto Ricans that live there. And Florida is not going to be a battleground state, but pay attention to the way that they deal with these Puerto Ricans and these Puerto Rican communities, because it harkens back to the way that Trump dealt with them when he threw paper towels at them, when they had to leave the island and move there, because Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania who will be watching will determine who's going to actually win this election. I stop my Mike Madrid wind up and throw it to you.
I still can't get past the idea that the same people who do not believe that climate change is man-made believe that man made the hurricanes to send them to red counties and red states. Like I don't understand the cognitive dissonance there. Like I don't get it. Like, look, brother, climate change isn't just going to happen. It's happening. It's here. We're in the middle of it. It's going to get far, far worse. The only way out of this, by the way, I believe, is going to be through innovation and technological change. And this is, I don't want to make this, partisan spiel. This is a panic. Like, we need to get this taken care of right away. Government has proven that it's not capable of uniting us enough in order to get this problem solved. And that's not an indictment on government. That's an indictment on the crazy that we've allowed to infect our body politic and our population. And having said that, only half of us in the country are now going to be committed to actually solving the problem. And we're going to have to innovate and change the technologies that we use to get out of this. Not just necessarily in conservation, although that's absolutely a part of it. It's going to have to be finding ways to actually moderate and regulate our environment, our climate. And we're going to have to incentivize the private sector massively to kind of speedily solve these problems, because we're never going to be able to do this in unison, or you do this together, not just as the United States, but as a global community, even our local elected officials. Didn't your family get hit last year with hurricane season?
He came within a foot of going in their house. Like they
Yeah,
got so lucky.
yeah. And they're still saying, well, we're not going to leave, right?
Right.
And there's just, at a certain point, it's like every year this is becoming a routine where these storms are so strong, insurance companies aren't going to insure anymore.
That part.
Right. And then think about the economy of the workforce not being stable enough to stay in one place to keep businesses going. Then supply chains, then the amount of taxpayer dollars for FEMA and the rebuilds. And do you rebuild? And how do you rebuild? And why do you rebuild? And where do you rebuild? All of these things are coming into question now. And the price tag on what's going to happen over the next 48 hours is going to be extraordinary. So things are changing. They're changing now. And again, I'm still at this point. It's kind of like the vaccines. At what points does science not matter to you enough where you're willing to put your own family and your own person in danger to the point where it affects me and my family and my life? And why do I keep trying to bring you along in this bigger, broader community when you're the one who doesn't care and doesn't want to care and doesn't want to listen to the facts, because everyone else and all their crazy book learning is, causing trouble for your inconvenient, the inconveniencing your way of life. So I'm frustrated with it, Chuck. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm also increasingly of the view that half of us doesn't want to be a willing participant in the future and taking care of all of us in our state, in our country, in our world, and we're gonna have to just do it alone, do it without them.
I think I feel seen when you talk about folks talking about the book learning, because that's the way I refer to it, as a book learning I did back in the day. He is talking to me. So there's another thing about this, and we'll get off the hurricane and move on. But this is the Latino Vote podcast. Everything that we talk about, we talked about the uniqueness of this hurricane and the way that it's running through the I-4 corridor is one way that it'll affect the Latino vote in Pennsylvania. I connected those threads earlier. There's another way, and today, Climate Power in Action, the Latino arm of Climate Power, is putting out a new poll where they went in and talked to Latinos about the way climate change affects their lives. To Mike's point, we have found, and it's not a shocker, that lots of Latinos live in the poorest parts of a community. And the poorest parts of many communities are at the bottom of the hill. Anywhere where there's a city, when you talk about the folks who live up on the mountain or on the hill, or normally the rich folks who like to look down, it's funny if you go back into Aztec and to Mayans, if we've done this through generations of like the important people were up on the hill and the poor people were down by the river. Well, that means they get flooded first. But I think we may have somebody on in the coming weeks, because I want to go through this data a little bit with Mike from Inaction and have them on to talk about what these Latinos said to pollsters about climate change, because we don't think about climate change when we think about Latinos. White consultants think that all we care about is immigration. And then smart consultants would say, well, let's talk about jobs and the economy, which is right. But especially with the younger group of folks, climate change is very much on their mind. And we can get into that with somebody that Sylvia, who actually saw last night. I want to have her on. She was telling me about this polling. I said, I'm going to mention it tomorrow on the podcast. I'm going to have her on. We were going to have her on 3 weeks ago, but she broke her foot. I remember this now. While Mike was gone, she was going to fill in. But Mike, let's change topics and let's talk about more current news. Tomorrow, this is Wednesday, tomorrow, Thursday, which will be the day after when you hear this podcast, Vice President Harris will have done a town hall with Univision. Tell me, Mike, what you're looking at again to get her out of her. What do you want to hear from her? What do you think her strategy for doing this town hall? And I would remind everybody else that the former president was going to do his this week as well, but the hurricane has delayed his, so his will be a week later. So what are you looking for tonight with VP Harris doing this Univision town hall?
Well, I think the two messages that come out are going to be on the border, of course, her border policy, because it can't. It's just too big of a news. And
Mm-hmm.
the second is going to be on, hopefully, on the economy. And I think that if she comes out on those two, I think that's probably a net win. We talk about Univision a lot on the show. Univision, they're friends. Even though Mike Madrid, like all of his friends, a little bit of a prickly relationship there. Because as you all know, I'm a big believer that the vast majority of us Latinos are speaking and consuming and learning about our politics in English. It doesn't mean that there isn't a desperate need to have good Spanish language mediums, and Univision largely fills that void. Um, but like I said, the dramatic change in the Harris administration's approach, the way the Democrats are dramatically approaching border security versus immigration reform, can't be anything but newsworthy. And I think she's going to have to go at it very strongly, strenuously. I think that she will. That is the right move. But she's going to have to drive an economic agenda in there as well. I think you will also hear her talking about a pathway to citizenship and DACA protections. She'll also make the claim that you can't get to those the pathway to citizenship or immigration reforms without border security first. That is not only right, that is what a lot of us who've been involved in these fights and fighting for both have been saying for decades. The fact that the Democrats have now uncoupled this is a smart, smart strategy. I believe very firmly that you can get them both done if you get them both done separately. And this, again, is just such a significant break from where the Democrats have been in the past that I'm optimistic about it. I think it will work. In terms of raw vote totals, look, anything can happen. Like I said in my book, I wouldn't be surprised if Harris pushes Trump's support levels down to the low 30s, maybe even the high 20s. I do believe it's possible. I also believe it's possible he could get into the high 30s and maybe even hit 40. My strong sense is he's probably going to end up in the mid 30s, 35, 36 range, which was not, it was exactly where he was in 2020. But most of the polling suggests, all of the polling suggests, she still has a couple points to go to push him back down there. The polling averages would tell us that this will be the third election in a row where Donald Trump improves his vote share amongst the Latino electorate. And we're at a pivot moment here. We're at a crisis moment here. You can either keep listening to the small and shrinking voices who say it's not a problem, it's not happening, it's bad methodology, and it's bad math, only to come back a few months later when everybody knows that it all happened to say, well, it happened because not the reasons that you think it did. Or you could just listen to math and science. If the Democrats are going to be the party of math and science, then be the party of math and science. There's a problem here. And the only way you address a problem and fix it is by acknowledging it. And once you acknowledge it, then you can start changing course to move in the right direction. And I'm so grateful that Kamala Harris is doing that and leading her party in that direction. There's still going to be those voices after tonight, after the polling, after the election. We're saying it ain't happening. Didn't happen as much as you think it did. And my hope is that those voices will be silenced after this by their own party because they've been killing them. And you can't lose anymore as Democrats. You're at the 5 alarm fire stage where you have to acknowledge either we're going to keep going down this road and at some point the Republicans are going to catch us and beat us with the Latino vote, or we're going to make the adjustments necessary to start winning again and start making sure that with these races in Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Pennsylvania aren't as close as they are because they shouldn't be. And that's the bottom line. That's the message. That's my rant. Chuck, what do you think about
Do you
this?
hear Mike Madrid throwing a little Stone Cold Austin in there? And that's the bottom line.
That's the bottom
I like
line.
that. What I want to see if we heard this. So keep in mind, this thing has already happened. When we're airing this podcast, it would have happened last night. And I bet she gets a lot of questions about how she's going to be favorable on immigration, but also secure the border. So I think that they'll push her on that. And what does it mean? Do you want to have more immigration? What is your ideas to fix it? She will probably divert back to the bill that Donald Trump stopped that was negotiated by a Republican in Oklahoma. So that's one thing. The second thing is I hope she really leans into what she's doing. And what do you mean by that? I mean, I think she should talk about the money she has spent in Spanish advertising. Not that it's the end all be all, but it's so much different than Republicans. You can say, look, I'm trying to earn your vote, and I'm spending a lot of money on this station to talk to you about my ideas to have a different vision for America than Donald Trump. I'm running ads to tell you about my housing plan, my Marshall Plan on housing, as Mike Madrid would say. I'm running ads here to tell you how we need an adult in the White House to fix our problems. It ain't going to be perfect, but it ain't going to be that crazy, man. Like, that's what I hope. I hope she talks about people around her. You know, people never brag about their staff or about people, but she probably employs several hundred, if not thousands of Latinos on this campaign working for her, many of them my friends. But I bet Donald Trump don't have 100 Latinos on staff. I bet he's got 2 or 3, and he should be talking about those because our community want to know that we're seen and heard. Let me say this about something that happened that Mike Madrid said that stood with me at the live taping. Somebody asked something about the Latino vote, blah, blah, blah. But Mike said that he would hope, and I would disagree with this, that the Latino vote would get 50-50. I disagree with that. I hope Democrats win 90% of it. But if it got to 50-50, he made a great point, which was it would demand more of both parties' attention, and it would give us a bigger voice in the room. It would demand that we're at the senior level of campaigns and of consulting because they would have to work really hard to get our vote, both parties. And that's why I'm always bringing up that Democrats are outspending Republicans 20-1 because we're actually trying to do something. But what Mike was saying is very fair because if the harder they have to fight to get us to vote for a party, the more voice we have in public policy. And so if we say, I've got 800 Latinos on my staff to a Latino audience, that means you're not just talking about what you're doing. It starts with you hiring us. And that's a good first step, whether you agree or disagree on the policy. So I think that's one of the things that I think is a missed opportunity many times with campaigns. So I think that thinking about that and the way that she does this is going to be big in differentiating herself. And this is not the old Univision of old. They've been bought by Televisa. I would remind everybody about the big interview they did with Donald Trump that got everybody going crazy. Mike Madrid can't say that they don't like him. They showed up at his book party last week at our live signing and got books signed and wanted their picture taken with Mike Madrid. So he is loved by lots of folks. So take that with a grain of salt when he says he is hated because the people were there and showed up. But that's what I'm looking for. And I think that that's what she should do. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Let me ask I'm going to change topics, Mike, and give you a question about the next topic on our list, which is something very different. On Sunday of this week, Politico wrote a story about how Kamala Harris is not doing press interviews and how she needs to get out and actually talk to the media. And it's almost like clockwork. On Monday morning, she wrote out a press blitz this week. Mike, I'm going to tell you just some of the people she's talked to in the last 3 days, and I want to get your opinion on what she's trying to accomplish here. But she did a 60 minutes interview on Sunday night. She was on The View on Monday. She also did a podcast with a woman called Call Me Daddy that's got 5,000 people on it. She did Steve Colbert and Howard Stern. That seems like reaching tens of millions of people. What's your thought about all of this press blitz that she's doing this week?
Well, the media has changed. And again, Donald Trump taught us this. And I think a lot of the legacy media, of which many of these folks are our friends, haven't made that adjustment yet. And she's employing exactly the right strategy. Howard Stern has 73 million listeners. That's unbelievable. And they tend to be white. They tend to be male. They tend to be the demographic that is appealed to for Trump. So her going on that and Howard Stern endorsing her and saying, I'm going to support you after supporting Trump in the past and having Trump on as a guest is a really, really big deal. That's not something you're going to get on CBS or NBC or Univision. You're just not. And I think it's the way the media works now. She did this podcast called Call Her Daddy, which is I did not know this, Chuck. This is the second largest podcast in the country behind Joe Rogan's. Like it's
Dude, I
that
was looking too because I was like, what is this? Again, it's not for me and you, but I looked and it said they had 5 million regular listeners.
it's that big. And that tells us something. If I'm not even aware of it, again, it's not my audience. I'm this old, Republican guy.
Me
So
too.
so I'm like the last guy that they're talking to, and I get that, but the fact that I don't even know that it's there. Like I don't listen to Taylor Swift albums, but I know that she's there. I had no idea that so many of these media outlets are influencing and made the main connection point to millions and millions of Americans. Those are the demographics that she needs. They're not gotcha too. This is the last point I'm going to make. Our media, and this is unique to the American media, there's a gotcha politics to it where it doesn't matter how well a Kamala Harris or a Donald Trump performs on a 60 Minutes. They're looking for the gotcha quote. They're looking for the gotcha moment where they can embarrass or trip up the candidate. It makes it really difficult as a communications professional to want to put your candidate on these platforms. The only thing that they're looking for is something negative. That's what gets them the eyeballs. So when she goes on a podcast and has a flowing conversation about what she likes to cook or who she is or her relationships with her kids, like that's something that the media used to be, and the mainstream media used to be in this country, and it no longer is. I think it's really, really smart. I think that, Donald Trump in his own way has been doing this for years, although the podcasts, the channels he's been on are a little bit peculiar or a lot weird, as they would say. So, but they're both speaking directly to the audiences that they need to on the podcast platforms that they need to, and it's smart. I think that she's done really well with it, and I think that that should continue to be the strategy. I mean, what do you think about it?
I think the part that's the most interesting to me is I think 60 Minutes and even Howard Stern is a little bit traditional, even though Howard Stern is very not traditional. I think the part, and I'm going back to the woman podcast, and it is literally a podcast made for women. Like they talk about shit women should talk about and feelings and sex and all the things that you would never see on regular TV. That's why she's blown up to be so big. It's kind of the female Joe Rogan in their own way with
Right,
less sexism and all the things.
right.
Um, but it leads me to something me and you were talking about off air, which is it also brings a light on the new way campaigns work. They don't work like me and Mike Madrid used to do back in the day. Like you could be on 4 news channels and buy the evening news and talk to everybody. When I'm in a focus group now and I'm talking to anybody under 35, Mike, when I'm like, where do you spend your day and where do you get your information? I'm like, I don't know, scrolling on TikTok, scrolling on my reels on Instagram. If they're a college educated nerd like you are, they're on Twitter.
Mhm.
And that's where people, let me tell you the biggest difference when people say, Chuck, what's one of the biggest difference? Sure, TikTok is big. TikTok owns the political space around young influencers, and anybody who badmouths TikToks as a communication tool is shooting their foot because that's where these kids are. A. B, the second part of that is that when you ask people how they're searching for information, just 10 years ago, just 8 years ago, they would leave a platform and go to Google and put in Mike Madrid for Congress. That doesn't happen anymore. They don't leave their platform. So they are literally searching what we're calling in platform for all of you nerds. That means if they're on TikTok, they're searching TikTok for Mike Madrid for Congress. If they're on Instagram, they're searching there Mike Madrid for Congress. Whatever the topic is, they're looking on the social media feeds where their peers are for the information. And that's just very different. So the campaigns that are the most successful, even Kamala Harris, this amazing rise that she had really quickly when we were talking about it's the brat summer. I know that's hard for Mike Madrid to understand, but the brat summer was very cultural to young women who understood what brat was and this color green and all the things that aren't made for 50-year-old Mexicans like me and Mike.
Right.
But culturally competence is also works with young people. And being culturally competent is something that makes them relate or see a politician not through the lens of the CBS, ABC evening news, but the way that they consume content on TikTok and other platforms that are dominating the way people are getting their information. And that's the biggest difference. People that can figure out how to do that communication. And you can't buy advertising on TikTok. You have to have groups of influencers who do that. You can buy advertising on Facebook and you can buy advertising uh, on Twitter or X, but you can't on the other. So it becomes like this thing about figuring out strategy. And I think that that's why it's brilliant. Speaking of press, Mike, I wanted to ask your opinion. I saw this week, and I thought you may remember the last time this news organization was trying to figure out how to do that. But did I read correctly this week, Mike, that Fox News is going to roll out another Spanish language news or entertainment channel? Is that true?
Yeah, and let's talk about this just a little bit. I mean, as you know, I'm a little bit of a critic. Friendly, Univision, hats off to Univision. They did come and they have always been kind to me. I'm kind to them too, by the way.
Whatever. Let
You
it
have
go.
some,
Let's go to Fox News.
yeah, there's 20%, as Michelle Mayorga, who's a Latina pollster that we've had on the show here, has shared with us a good national survey. When she's pulling a national survey of Latinos, 17% of those interviews are in Spanish. Let's say it's 20%, higher side. Um, this is not that significant of the Latino vote share. Is it big? Yeah, it's big. Does it matter? Of course, every vote matters. But the impression, the idea, the stereotype of the Latino voter is, oh, it's all in Spanish. It's 20% of who we are. On a good day, it's 20%. Now, Fox News, incidentally, just put out its third quarter viewership numbers. They have had an explosion of Latinos watching Fox News. It's huge. It's the largest vote share of any race or ethnic group. This is your standard, regular English Fox News show. We don't talk about this enough, but as I've shared before, the misinformation we need to be worried about is not on Spanish language WhatsApp chats coming from Venezuela. It's from watching Fox News, guys. That's the bigger problem. The problem with Latinos and misinformation is in English. It's like what it is with everybody else because that's where our viewers are at. But lo and behold, Fox does something really fascinating. They announced that they're going to start a Spanish language show headed up by Rachel Ocampos Duffy, who does their Fox and Friends weekend editions. She's
Wait,
going to
wait,
be
wait, wait. Is she the one that's married to the congressman? But Duffy from Wisconsin?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And so she's going to be the main host of a new news channel, Fox News in Spanish, that's going to talk about culture, sports, and of course politics. So very similar format. My question in my mind was like, it's launching October 15th. So the question is like, is this designed to influence the election? I mean, perhaps, but the impact of that alone is not going to be that important. I think the bigger play here, Chuck, I think what's really going on is that Fox News's viewership is old. And when I say old, I don't mean Chuck Rocha old. I mean really old. Like
Whoa, 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 whoa.
like
How old
old,
I mean?
old.
Oh,
I mean old.
oh.
So and they're gonna run off a demographic cliff here. If they don't start making inroads significantly into the Latino electorate for their English mediums, at some point in the not too distant future, their whole audience just falls off of a cliff. So I think this is less political, although it is that. I think it has a lot to do with just basic survival and market share. And it's going to be fascinating to see a cable news show in Spanish with the reach that Fox has competing with an Univision and Telemundo.
Didn't they try this before?
I think they did.
Yeah, it was Latino Fox, and it failed miserably, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there's not that much viewership out there to do this. And to further segment it up with Univision and Telemundo dominating the space, again, to your point earlier, along with TikTok and YouTube, those, by the way, folks, are not all in English. You can you can use TikTok in another language, Spanish being one of them, and YouTube in Spanish as well, of course. So the way so many of our conceptions are that these social media platforms are just in English is obviously wrong. Younger people over-index there anyway. That's where they live. That's where they're at. That's what they're watching. To have another entrant into this space, I think is fascinating. Even marginal results, marginal impact could be very significant for Republicans and for conservatives. But I think it's something else is at play. I think it's much, much bigger than just trying to influence elections. I think they're dying on the English side, and they're trying to find a conduit to build brand for families in intergenerational households to keep their product alive.
I think you're right. It's going to be interesting to see how the whole news industry changes in the next 5 years? Like me and you've talked about how they've been laying off journalists, basically Latino journalists, and like what happens to MSNBC, CNN, Fox News after the election is over? Like, what is you hear that none of them are really doing great with money and they're not big money makers, but you know, it's just interesting as multimedia starts getting fragmented around the country, like what is their role? I love watching the news, but I know it's probably not built for me. Like, I think all of them are having more of a streaming online presence now, and I think that helps. It's just going to be really interesting. I don't have a judgment on it. Obviously, I do a lot of CNN and MSNBC and others, and I love being on their shows, and I think that the information is good. But I just don't know the future of media and reporting is really going to be a story that we're going to talk more about. In our final little bit here, I want to talk about something that is coming up for me on PBS, and then I'm going to throw it over to Mike to talk about a promotion we're going to do with the podcast and some fun things that he's had made out in the California Senate race. But for all of you listening who enjoy the Latino Vote podcast, I wanted to plug that coming up on October the 22nd, that's October the 22nd. PBS is going to be releasing a documentary about the Latino vote called The Voices. They have a Voices out right now. This is an ongoing series. The current Voices they're running is around a beautiful thing that John Leguizamo is doing about the history of Latinos in America and the history of the Latinos around the world. So this is a follow-up to that about USA politics, the Latino vote. I was honored to be featured in the upcoming documentary on PBS. So make sure you tune in to see some good old Mexican redneck wisdom, as I would say, on October 22nd. And we'll be talking about it and probably have a link to it in the podcast that week as we lead into it and get y'all some exclusive clips from a bunch of good Latino producers who filmed me in Chicago and in a couple other places. I'll tell you a funny behind the scenes on it right now is I shot this thing 3 months ago. Before Joe Biden got out, and then I had to go and reshoot it again after Kamala Harris got in. Things had changed so much. So the original was shot in New York, and the second was shot in Chicago at the convention because we quickly had to reshoot it. But let me throw it over to you, Mike, and tell us about this exciting offer you have for our premium listeners from all over the country.
Well, real quick, I have a very strong inclination that the Latino vote is going to be appearing in the PBS special as well. Chuck will be there. I will be there. They got some good shots of us filming live the podcast.
I totally forgot they did that when we were doing the podcast.
That's because you're an old man. That's to remind you.
Jesus.
And then there's a little Mike Madrid returning to his hometown too. I see some of my Latino buddies from high school that I haven't seen in 30 years. Just really great shots. So it was great to work on the documentary. I think you're going to really enjoy it. We'll keep pumping it. And I think we're going to get some of the filmmakers in studio with us on the Latino Vote podcast to talk a little bit more about it. But it is coming out in October. Keep your eyes open. And we will be pushing it, the both of us. But for the moment, the best thing you can be doing, and this is a giveaway, this is a promotion as we get closer to election cycle. Last night, Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey met mano a mano on the debate stage in the United States Senate race here in California. It was a beatdown. I won't tell you which way it went, but you can imagine. I decided that I wanted to have a baseball card reminding people of my childhood hero, Steve Garvey, going full-blown MAGA. Here's what the baseball cards look like. It might be in reverse a little bit.
No, it's perfect.
It's perfect. So you can see it on time. And here's the deal. If you retweet hashtag the Latino vote, send me a DM or DM us on the Latino Vote podcast Twitter page. Still calling it Twitter because that's still what it is. Use the hashtag the Latino vote. DM us your address. We'll mail you up to 5 cards. Free of charge.
They're going to be collector's items.
These will be collector's items. So I'm sure we'll do more later on. But Steve McGarvey, I'm not gonna share with you the back. They're funny. They're fun, and they're reminders. Even though Steve Garvey is trying to pretend like he is not full blown MAGA, that he is. He's making some concerted efforts to try to appeal to Latino voters. We're going to see how well that works out for Mr. Garvey. Again, the great irony is this was one of my childhood heroes. If you had told me that 12-year-old Mike Madrid would someday be working against this threat to democracy, I would have told you you are crazy. But here we are. He was one of the reasons I started collecting baseball cards. So I thought I would commemorate the moment. Chuck, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to have a little bit of fun with this. we'll send you some cards in DC. You can hand them out to your buddies out on the Hill.
That is awesome. Don't forget to go to the Latino Vote podcast Twitter account. You can DM there. Andres will get us the addresses to get everybody to. And again, don't forget to like us, follow us, to share us. Look, we don't have some big corporate backer. This is just me and Mike Madrid and a group of Latinos here trying to keep this thing alive. And it's going really good. Every week, the membership grows. And again, the live show was so good. We're going to do more live shows. Maybe we'll do a recap show after the election. I'll come out to LA. It's a good excuse to come out to the West Coast. But it was just really good to feel the energy and the love from all the fans. You fans make this possible. Don't forget to tell your other friends, like us, share us. If you're lucky enough to still have your mama, give her a call, tell her you love her. And don't forget to call your friends in Florida and tell them to get out of the damn way of the hurricane. And until next week, we'll see you on the backside.